Welcome everyone. Today we will discuss what would have happened if America joined the Axis in World War II. Now, as a bit of historical context, in 1929, after the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression hit and the world economy went into recession. After this, the world's leading economies tried fixing things. In the USSR, in the 1932 elections, Franklin D. Roosevelt defeated Herbert Hoover to become the president. He started a bill known as the New Deal, aimed at increasing public spending and workers' rights. However, this law was opposed by the business class, who saw this as communist and a reduction of their power. In 1934, some of these businessmen came together in a plot known as the Business Plot. In it, they wanted to do a march on Washington and pressure President Roosevelt to make retired Army General Smedley Butler the vice president. They had two candidates in mind beforehand, General Smedley Butler and General MacArthur. But MacArthur was thought of as too loyal to the establishment, so they went with Butler. Butler was a veteran of the Spanish-American War and World War I, and felt like he spent his life serving Wall Street. Because of this, he became anti-business. The plan was to arm 500,000 veterans of the First World War to march on Washington. These veterans were supposed to receive their bonuses in 1945, but due to the Great Depression, they wanted them now. These veterans would be led by Smedley Butler, who was a war hero for them. In 1934, the plan was about to be executed, but Butler went to the US Congress and told them everything. No one was arrested, and this plot became a thing of the past. But what if this plan was executed, and Butler went ahead with it? Today we'll answer that question. But before starting the scenario, I'd greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel, as it would help me create more alternate history scenarios just like this. I will have also created a schedule for my videos, so keep that in mind. But without any further ado, let's start the scenario. Our point of divergence would be that Butler agrees, and in 1934, these businessmen would also collaborate with ultranationalists like the German-American Bund and the American League. These three would form a triumvirate, and in 1934, General Smedley Butler would lead the Whitehall Putsch. 500,000 veterans would enter Washington and would storm the White House demanding their bonuses. Roosevelt would agree, and Butler would become the vice president. Butler would use his position to push through the businessmen's agenda. In the 1936 elections, the triumvirate would join with Alf Landon and would win the elections due to Roosevelt never gaining popularity without the New Deal. After a few days, Landon would be assassinated and Butler would become the US president. The triumvirate would use him to push their agendas, and the US would become increasingly nationalistic and anti-reform. This would also influence geopolitics, with the US becoming closer to Italy and Germany because of Britain renewing the Anglo-Japanese alliance. Due to this anti-reform policy, the American economy would recover painfully slow. Any and all economic reforms would be seen as communist, while anti-British and pro-neutrality attitudes would become common. When war breaks out in Europe, America would maintain its neutrality, but the German-American Bund sends a few legions to Germany. The war would progress like it did in Europe, while in Asia, Japan would still invade China and get stuck. But due to them allying with Britain here, they wouldn't take British territory in Asia, but they would still get them to concede Indonesia and French Indochina to Japan. They would also strike Pearl Harbor, dragging the US into the war. The US would join the war against Japan and ask Britain to cut their ties with Japan, but Britain refuses, and anti-British sentiment reaches its peak. What was the point of the War of Independence if America still obeyed Britain? Taking advantage of the situation, Mussolini and the funny mustache man declare war on Japan and invite China, the US, and several other smaller countries to form the Axis. America would send its navy in the Pacific to deal with Japan, while Europe goes the same. Due to them being on opposite sides here, the US wouldn't lend lease to the Soviets, leading to the Eastern Front being bloodier and slower than in our timeline. D-Day wouldn't happen, but Britain would still land in southern Italy and southern France, causing civil wars in Italy and Vichy France. By late 1944, Japan would be defeated by the US after the US invades the home islands. The USA would also invade Canada, and in propaganda would say that they planned to put Edward VIII on the British throne. British Malaya and Burma would get invaded by the US, and India would break into open revolt. In the Atlantic, America convinces Ireland to join the war, and they would invade Northern Ireland. America would enter the Mediterranean and cut British supply to France and Italy, leading to their civil wars becoming bloodier. With Britain losing on all sides, the British Empire collapses, with the dominions of Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa breaking their ties with the Isles. Egypt and Palestine declare independence, while in the home Isles, Ireland takes Northern Ireland, leaving only Britain to lick its wounds. In 1945, the French and Italian civil wars would end in an Axis defeat, with Italy and France freeing themselves of the ultra-nationalists, while in the East, Germany would increasingly lose ground to the Soviets, till in 1946 Berlin falls, and with it the German Reich falls as well. The funny mustache man would shoot himself, and the Soviets would occupy the Balkans and Germany until they figure out what to do with the occupied land. In 1947, both America and the Soviets would be the only ones left in their respective factions. America would not be accepting peace with the Soviets and aiming to defeat the communists by risking minimal American lives. It just so happens that they've created that weapon. On the 12th of May, 1947, the people in the USSR's biggest eastern port city, Vladivostok, would be going about their daily lives when suddenly a bomb is dropped, and 8 seconds later, the entire city would be destroyed with a mushroom cloud appearing above it. The Soviets would be stunned at this American show of power, but Stalin refuses to surrender. In the following 3 months, 3 new targets are chosen by the US: Sevastopol, Leningrad, and Astrakhan. Important Soviet ports on the Black, Baltic, and Caspian Seas are nuked, with Soviet morale sinking even further. In September 1947, a nuke is dropped 150 miles away from Moscow. The message is clear, and a coup takes place in the Soviet Union to remove Stalin. The Soviets surrender, and the world is restructured. In Asia, Japan loses all its colonies and becomes a democracy like in our timeline. Korea would gain independence and become a democracy, while China would be united under Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalists, who would win the subsequent civil war. Southeast Asia would gain independence, with most governments being loyal to Washington. India, after its revolt, would declare independence, but with many factions calling for independence, a civil war would happen, and after US mediation, all sides would agree to a truce, with India being carved up into different states, some unified on a geographical basis, while others being united on an ethnic or religious basis. In the Middle East, America and the Egyptian kingdom would oversee the division of the Holy Land, while places like Lebanon, Syria, Libya, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia would become independent. In Europe, the peace in the West would mostly be the same, although the denazification of Germany would be even looser than in our timeline. In the East, some countries would expand, while others would expand at the behest of the USSR, while the USSR would be forced to give independence to the Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, maybe even the Central Asian states, but that may be a stretch. They all would adopt democratic governments, with the USSR reforming at the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, or RSSR. The RSSR would, after a few years, reform as the Russian Federation to integrate into the New World Order. No Cold War would happen, and America stands alone as the global hegemon. Though, as we approach the 2000s, other states like China and even India are catching up. The future seems uncertain, but for now, the sun rests on the American world order. This is where I'll end the scenario. If you liked it, please consider subscribing and leave your thoughts in the comments down below. But for now, goodbye.